The Imperium of man spans 1,000,000 worlds, but only a fraction of its countless trillions will ever know what it is to be wealthy. To be rich in the Imperium is not simply to have possessions, but to be elevated into a separate reality, one where the suffering of the masses is not seen, not heard, not even imagined. For the rich, every breath is filtered, every view is curated, every taste purchased at a cost paid in other lives. Their existence is the culmination of millennia of exploitation, woven into a structure that the ecclesiarchy calls holy and the administratum calls necessary. To live among the aristocracy is to exist as though the galaxy itself bends to your comfort, and to believe that such comfort is deserved. On hive worlds, wealth rises in physical form as spires that pierce the skies. At their peaks, nobles recline in halls of marble, drinking wine poured from amphorae older than empires, while below them billions choke on fumes and consume corpse starch. The rich look down from windows made of crystal-clear transparium that shows them only the horizon and never the depths, because the architects of those towers designed them so. The very geometry of their existence ensures that what is beneath them remains invisible. On agri-worlds, the wealthy walk fields, where crops grow, not for the masses, but for noble tables. Entire planetary harvests are diverted so that a banquet hall may be filled with exotic fruits, while the workers who cultivated them live on nutrient gruel. In void stations, the rich drift through gravity-controlled chambers lined with art and relics, their eyes never forced to see the skeletal servitors that scrub the decks and bleed into the machines that sustain the life they take for granted. Nobility is a condition sustained by blindness. The Imperium teaches that hierarchy is divine, that the Emperor himself decreed the order of all things, and that to rise above one's station is to invite ruin upon the soul. The sermons preached in glittering chapels assure the rich that their position is holy, that their indulgence is not gluttony but worship, that their very leisure honors the Emperor because their bloodlines once served him in war. They repeat these truths until belief becomes instinct and doubt becomes impossible. A child born to nobility learns from the cradle that obedience flows upward and wealth flows downward, but never the other way around. To be rich is to inherit a script written millennia ago, and to play your role without ever questioning the cost. In the noble districts of Necromunda's Hive Primus, the air is perfumed by machines that pump filtered breezes into the avenues. Their fountains sparkle with water, brought from glaciers 2 systems away, while the underhives rot in filth. Servants walk barefoot so their steps will not disturb the silk carpets, their silence purchased with mutilation or threat. The lords of these hives speak of duty and stewardship, but their words are drowned in the sound of laughter echoing from feasts where dishes are carved from the flesh of creatures extinct on entire continents. The rich of the Imperium live in constant ritual. Mornings begin not with labor, but with procession. Servitors shuffle forward with robes, cosmetics, weapons, ornaments, each one crafted at costs beyond imagination. Hair is pinned with metals mined in caverns where slaves collapse under toxic dust. Faces are painted with powders ground from minerals harvested by children who never live past their 2nd decade. Jewelry gleams with stones cut from asteroids where hundreds died in vacuum breaches to extract a single gem. Every act of luxury is a sacrament of suffering, and yet the noble does not see. They cannot see. They have been trained never to ask what the real price is, because the moment they do, the illusion fractures. They are taught instead to think of beauty, to speak of heritage, to repeat the words duty, honor, faith, as though such incantations transform exploitation into virtue. They believe themselves generous because they fund cathedrals whose stones are laid by broken hands, merciful because they employ servants who would be executed otherwise, righteous because they pray in chapels that shine while billions rot in darkness. Their kindness exists only in the narrow confines of their own circle, their cruelty in the vast silence of indifference. The rich eat meals that are not food, but statements. A single dinner course may cost more than a manufactorum worker will see in their lifetime. Wine vintages are hoarded in vaults, while families starve outside the gates. Spices are imported from worlds conquered generations ago, their soil drenched in blood to grow flavors for noble tongues. Artists and musicians are enslaved by patronage, their creativity directed toward glorifying dynasties whose history is written in oppression. Even their entertainment is paid for in lives. A song performed at a feast may have consumed the health of the singer who practiced until their voice broke. A sculpture admired in a hall may have cost the lungs of the mason who carved it. Beauty is not beauty in the Imperium. It is blood, frozen, in a pleasing shape. For the rich, this is normal. It is the only life they know. The stories they hear of the underhives are not warnings, but curiosities, tales of strange creatures who live in filth because they were too lazy or unworthy to ascend. They speak of starvation as if it were myth, of overwork as if it were natural law, of rebellion as if it were madness. To them, the masses are not people, but numbers on tithe records and production quotas. When unrest arises, their solution is simple. Cut rations until obedience returns, send enforcers to punish the disobedient, sign contracts with mercenaries to slaughter dissidents. They do not see human beings. They see malfunctions in the machine that delivers their wealth. To be rich is to exist inside a theater where the script is already written. The noble is an actor repeating lines they did not write, moving across a stage built on bones they never acknowledge. They speak of honor while their guards torture prisoners, of loyalty while their families betray one another for advantage, of faith while their indulgence mocks the very sermons they pretend to heed. Their belief is not hypocrisy, because they have never seen the contradiction. It is ignorance perfected over centuries until it becomes indistinguishable from truth. Beyond the luxury lies constant fear. Though it is disguised, nobles know their lives depend on secrecy and distance. They live high above, because to descend is to risk assassination or rebellion. They surround themselves with guards because even in splendor they are prey to rivals. They hide in pleasure because reality gnaws at the edges of their illusions. And above all, they fear the Inquisition, the one power that can strip away privilege without warning. A noble's wealth may buy them armies, ships, entire cities, but a single word of suspicion from an inquisitor can erase them. This fear breeds rituals of piety. They fund pilgrimages, donate relics, commission churches not because they are devout, but because to appear anything less is dangerous. In their chapels, they kneel on cushions, while their servants kneel on stone. They recite prayers that praise the emperor, not as a god of sacrifice, but as a god of hierarchy. The message is always the same. The emperor protects through order, and order means the rich must rule, and the poor must suffer. This faith is not questioned, because to question is heresy. And heresy is punished not with demotion, but with annihilation. The wealth of the Imperium's rich is not measured in coin, but in distance. Distance from the smog that poisons lungs, distance from the screams of the tortured, distance from the stench of decay. They live so far removed from consequence that they can pretend it does not exist. And when the distance collapses, when the screams echo too loudly, or the smoke rises too high, they simply rise higher, build new towers, retreat to off-world estates, surround themselves with more layers of servitors and guards. The machine continues because it must. Their luxury requires misery, and misery is endless. On every world the story repeats. The aristocracy sits in chambers gilded with suffering, while the masses rot in shadows. They are not evil in their own eyes. They are not monsters to themselves. They are simply blind. And blindness is the most perfect cruelty of all. On Terra itself, the richest humans alive live in a splendor so grotesque that even other nobles whisper of it with awe and fear. The palaces of the High Lords rise from the surface like mountains of marble and gold, stretching upward into towers whose foundations were laid before most current nations even existed. These are not homes, but monuments carved from the flesh of a planet that has been stripped to sustain them. To be rich on Terra is to dine on delicacies imported from across the galaxy, while billions below in the hive warrens eat recycled protein and drink water poisoned by centuries of waste. The Lords never see this, never smell the rot that chokes the underlevels, never touch the walls stained with centuries of smoke. They exist above it all, in chambers where light is always flattering, where the air is always sweet, where silence is purchased by the cutting out of tongues. Their lives are defined, not by survival, but by ceremony. Every hour of their existence is scripted with rituals that reinforce their separation from the masses. A noble child in Terra's palaces will never know hunger, never see darkness, never hear a voice raised in desperation. Instead, they are trained to speak with perfect cadence, to move with the grace of someone who has never known exhaustion, to think in terms of dynasties rather than days. They learn history not as a record of suffering, but as a family ledger of victories and alliances. They are taught to view entire populations as statistics, entire wars as investments, entire worlds as possessions. When a world starves, it is not tragedy, but opportunity. When a rebellion flares, it is not horror, but disruption of revenue. When billions die, it is not catastrophe, but a shift in resources. On Necromunda, the lords of the spire live in towers so tall that clouds form below their balconies. Their lives are a constant masquerade of fashion and power, where every garment is a weapon and every banquet a battlefield. The noble houses of Necromunda's spire compete not with blades but with whispers and alliances, each family seeking to outshine the others in displays of wealth so obscene they border on parody. A gown woven from living silk whose threads twitch with alien life is not worn for comfort but for status, because the suffering required to obtain it is proof of superiority. The spire nobles never descend. To step into the lower levels would be to breathe air that scars lungs, to touch stone that burns skin, to risk contact with the reality that sustains their comfort. Instead, they remain aloft, their only view of the masses, a distant haze of smoke, their only awareness of the underhive, the flow of goods and tithes extracted by their overseers. They fund Manufactoria not to produce necessities but to ensure that their palaces remain stocked with luxuries, each industry twisted to serve noble appetite, while the workers who power it rot in endless servitude. On Macragge, the ruling classes claim nobility not merely of blood but of culture. The Ultramarines protect their realm with discipline and order, and so the rich of Macragge present themselves as stewards rather than parasites. Yet even here, wealth is measured in lives. The noble houses of Ultramar keep estates whose walls are carved from stone brought across star systems, whose tables are laid with foods grown in hydroponic vaults that could have fed entire continents. They mask their exploitation in the language of duty and responsibility, speaking of themselves as custodians of civilization. But when famine strikes, it is not the estates that go hungry. When tithes are called, it is not noble sons who are sent to die in foreign wars, but the children of farmers and miners. The rich of Ultramar may be more dignified, more restrained, but their dignity is built on the same foundation of suffering as the decadence of Necromunda. On feudal worlds, nobility wears armor instead of silk, but the story is unchanged. A baron rides across fields on a genetically bred steed that has never known hunger, his armor polished by servants whose fingers bleed into the plates, his sword forged from ores mined by slaves who will never even see the surface of the world they sustain. He speaks of honor while his peasants starve, of loyalty while his knights raid villages for taxes, of piety while his halls are filled with treasures stolen from generations of toil. On such worlds, the line between Lord and God blurs, because for the peasants who kneel in the mud, their master is as unreachable as the emperor himself. To be rich on a feudal planet is to rule not by economics, but by myth. And myth is stronger than chains, because it convinces the oppressed that their suffering is holy. In every system, the pattern repeats. On Forge worlds, the tech priests preach that efficiency is virtue, and so the wealthy magi of the Mechanicus hoard technologies forbidden to the common man. Their wealth is measured not in jewels or feasts, but in the possession of knowledge, in archives sealed to all but the highest ranks, in machines that could ease suffering, but are instead hoarded as symbols of superiority. They eat from plates that hum with power fields while workers eat rations of tasteless paste. They live in chambers where light is eternal, while billions labor in darkness so deep that night and day become meaningless. On shrine worlds, the rich mask themselves in faith. They adorn themselves with relics, purchase blessings from priests, build palaces whose walls are lined with bones of martyrs. Their wealth is spiritual theater, each indulgence cloaked in piety, each cruelty excused as sacrifice. They starve populations to fund pilgrimages, burn tithes of grain while their neighbors go hungry, enslave thousands to build cathedrals that rise higher than the clouds. They tell themselves that suffering is worship, that deprivation is a gift to the emperor, that their luxury is proof of his favor. And so the lie becomes truth, because in the Imperium, truth is nothing more than repetition sanctioned by faith. For the rich everywhere, life is a cycle of insulation. They rise in the morning to silence paid for in mutilation, dine on foods bought with blood, sit on thrones carved from bones, and sleep beneath ceilings painted with victories that were bought with extermination. They tell themselves they are virtuous because they donate to other nobles in distress, because they fund parades and festivals, because they pray in chapels while their workers scream in Manufactoria. But their virtue exists only in their reflection. their cruelty hidden in the shadows where they will never look. They are not monsters in their own eyes. They are merely the inevitable rulers of a galaxy designed to be ruled. Yet even among the rich, there is hierarchy. The wealth of a planetary governor is dust compared to that of a Lord Commander. The treasures of a noble house on Necromunda are baubles compared to the coffers of a High Lord of Terra. The Imperium's aristocracy devours itself as surely as it devours the masses, each layer consuming the one below, each family clawing for elevation, each dynasty plotting against its rivals. Wealth in the Imperium is never safe. Fortunes vanish in a generation. Titles are stripped by decree. Legacies erased by the sudden suspicion of heresy. That is why the rich cling so desperately to ritual, to displays of wealth, to layers of insulation. They know that their privilege is fragile, that their survival depends not merely on gold, but on the appearance of loyalty. They must always be seen to pray, to serve, to tithe, to celebrate the emperor. They must always be vigilant against whispers of corruption, because whispers can summon an inquisitor, and an inquisitor can destroy in a day what generations built. Yet for all their fear, the rich continue their games. They continue their feasts, their rituals, their endless parades of wealth because they cannot imagine another life. Their ignorance is deliberate, cultivated, perfected. They do not wish to know what the world is like for those beneath them. They do not care that their jewels are bought with suffering, that their feasts are bought with starvation, that their leisure is bought with death. To be rich in the Imperium is to live as a god among insects, and to believe that this is not only natural but holy. The rich of the Imperium do not merely consume, they govern, they command. They turn the lives of billions into numbers on ledgers and the fates of entire planets into pieces on a board. Politics among the wealthy is not a game of votes or voices, but a battlefield fought with alliances, arranged marriages, financial sabotage, and assassinations disguised as misfortune. In the chambers of planetary governors, policy is written not in laws but in feasts, in whispered promises traded over crystal goblets, in sealed letters carried by couriers whose tongues have been removed to ensure silence. To be wealthy is to understand that power flows not from the masses below, but from connections above. A governor's fortune may be vast, but it means nothing if a rival house can secure a decree from the administratum, or if an inquisitor's suspicion falls upon them. The politics of the rich is a constant balancing act between indulgence and paranoia, between displays of loyalty and ruthless pursuit of advantage. The great noble houses survive because they learn to mask cruelty in piety, greed in generosity, ambition in obedience. A single word uttered at the wrong time in the wrong place can erase entire bloodlines. So the rich learn to wrap their words in layers of meaning, to smile as they poison, to bow as they betray. Their wealth insulates them from the misery of the masses, but it never frees them from fear of each other. Rival dynasties scheme across generations. Children are raised as pawns in games that began long before their birth. Marriages are arranged not for love, but for the consolidation of resources, a union of estates that might outlast a century of war or crumble in a single scandal. Feasts are as dangerous as battlefields. Every glass of wine might be tainted, every course laced with toxins, every toast a declaration of intent, disguised as celebration. Nobles die as often from subtle poisonings and staged accidents as they do from open warfare, and yet the rituals continue because to live without them would be to admit vulnerability. In the wider galaxy, the richest families trade not merely in goods, but in worlds. They sign contracts with rogue traders who carry their influence beyond the borders of imperial space. They invest in manufactoria, where billions will work themselves to death to feed the nobles' coffers. They compete for military charters, supplying regiments of the Astra Militarum with weapons and armor, while ensuring that those very same regiments are staffed by commoners whose deaths will never trouble their conscience. The rich profit from war as much as they profit from peace. Every crusade declared by the ecclesiarchy is an opportunity to sell supplies. Every rebellion crushed by the Guard is a chance to claim new territories. Every Xenos invasion that devastates a sector becomes a market for reconstruction contracts. For the aristocracy of the Imperium, war is not horror, it is investment. A hive city reduced to rubble is not tragedy, it is future profit once rebuilt under noble control. The deaths of millions are not catastrophe, they are simply the cost of creating a fresh economy. To the masses, this is monstrous, but to the rich, it is common sense. They cannot see suffering as suffering, because they have been trained to view it as opportunity, and so they feed upon it endlessly. The paranoia that governs the wealthy is not baseless. The Imperium is a place where betrayal is inevitable and enemies are everywhere. A noble may sit in splendor today, but tomorrow their family could be accused of heresy, their estates confiscated, their names stricken from records. This constant fear shapes their lives as much as wealth. They employ entire armies of spies, networks of informants that reach into every level of their domains. Servants are not merely attendants, but ears that report to masters who trust no one. Family members spy upon one another because blood is no shield when power is at stake. The paranoia breeds cruelty. To prevent rebellion, nobles commission enforcers who terrorize the lower levels, breaking dissent before it can even form. To silence rivals, nobles arrange purges that wipe out entire households under the guise of rooting out heresy. To ensure obedience, nobles subject their own servants to mutilations that remind them of their place. Wealth and violence become inseparable, because without constant brutality, the system would collapse under the weight of misery it generates. Yet despite this fear, despite this endless cycle of suspicion, the rich still indulge in rituals of excess. They hold tournaments where knights in armor clash for the amusement of lords who wager fortunes on blood. They host masquerades where every guest wears masks, not only to entertain but to conceal the shifting alliances of the night. They commission operas and dramas that glorify their ancestors while the playwrights starve in the shadows. They maintain private zoos filled with beasts captured on distant worlds, creatures that devoured entire crews just to be displayed behind golden bars for the idle amusement of guests. They indulge because indulgence is proof of power. To live simply would be to admit equality with those beneath them, and that is unthinkable. The ecclesiarchy reinforces this cycle at every turn. Priests whisper that hierarchy is holy, that wealth is divine reward, that to serve the nobility is to serve the emperor. Nobles build shrines in their palaces, commissioning relics that glow with psychic residue, parading bones of long-dead saints as proof of their piety. The sermons they sponsor declare that suffering is sacred, that labor is worship, that starvation is a gift to the emperor. The rich hear these words and believe them, because belief shields them from doubt. To question the righteousness of their position would be to unravel the foundation of their existence, so they do not question, they cannot. And in their blindness they remain convinced that they are benevolent rulers, custodians of a divine order rather than parasites draining the life of trillions. Politics among the wealthy is not only paranoia and indulgence, it is also war by other means. Noble houses raise private armies equipped with weapons forbidden to commoners. They deploy fleets of void ships not to defend humanity but to secure trade routes and intimidate rivals. They hire assassins trained by ancient cults whose services cost entire estates. They maintain dungeons where enemies are broken not for information but for display, their screams echoing through corridors to remind all who enter that disobedience carries a price. In the grand palaces of the segmentum capitals, feasts and wars blur together. Each banquet hall a battlefield of glances and half-spoken threats. Each alliance a fragile thing that might collapse into bloodshed before the next sunrise. And all of it is wrapped in the language of faith and duty, as though treachery sanctified by prayer becomes loyalty. In this way, the rich live not only above the masses, but above consequence. They are too valuable to destroy, too powerful to discipline, too insulated to ever truly suffer the costs of their actions. When they err, it is the people below who pay. When their wars consume resources, it is the common man who starves. When their indulgence empties treasuries, it is the manufactoria that increase quotas. The rich consume endlessly because the machine of the Imperium ensures that their mistakes will never be borne by their own kind. This is the true politics of the wealthy, not the competition of ideas, not the governance of people, but the endless shifting of costs downward until the weight crushes those who can no longer resist. The nobles call this stewardship, but it is nothing more than the slow devouring of a species by its own rulers. The rich of the Imperium rule not only with wealth but with the invisible weapons of politics and fear. Their lives are measured not by labor, but by strategy, by the constant calculation of alliances and betrayals, by the endless weighing of whose loyalty can be bought, whose silence must be enforced, whose death is most profitable. For a noble family, power is never static. It must be maintained with vigilance, defended with paranoia, expanded with cruelty. Every rival house is a threat, every ally a potential traitor, every feast a battlefield where words cut deeper than blades. A governor's palace is as dangerous as a war zone, and the weapons are subtler but no less lethal. To speak too freely, to show weakness, to hesitate when boldness is expected, can unravel dynasties that have lasted for millennia. Politics among the rich is not governance, but predation. To survive is to devour. The nobles understand this because it is the very principle upon which the Imperium itself rests. The administratum extracts tithes until worlds are drained dry. The astra militarum consumes soldiers until generations are extinguished. The ecclesiarchy feeds upon faith until truth itself dissolves. The nobility imitate the very empire that sustains them. They consume and are consumed. A child born into nobility is taught not arithmetic, but intrigue. Their first lessons are not in compassion, but in suspicion. They are told stories of ancestors betrayed by cousins, of fortunes stolen through clever deception, of rivals destroyed not in open war, but in the quiet silence of poisoned wine. They learn to smile while calculating who must die, to speak graciously while drawing invisible daggers, to love only insofar as love strengthens alliances. For them, trust is an illusion, and family bonds are nothing more than chains waiting to be broken when ambition demands it. The nobility of Necromunda sharpen their claws in the endless games of the Spire, each house maneuvering with displays of grotesque wealth to humiliate the others. A banquet may feature dishes that required thousands of deaths to prepare, not because the taste matters, but because the suffering itself is proof of superiority. In the courts of Terra, wealth is wielded like a blade against rivals. Estates stripped in a single decree. Dynasties erased with one accusation of heresy whispered into the wrong ear. On Forge worlds, politics is measured in secrets, the hoarding of sacred knowledge, the careful rationing of technology that could change lives, but instead is locked away to ensure that power flows upward. In Shrine worlds, nobles trade in relics and saints' bones, each one claiming divine favor that justifies their dominance, each one ready to denounce a rival as a heretic the moment it becomes advantageous. War and wealth intertwine. A noble may raise regiments of soldiers not because they care for defense, but because soldiers are currency. To promise the guard 10,000 troops is to gain leverage in negotiations. To arm those troops with weapons manufactured in one's own foundries is to turn war into profit. To supply fleets with food from one's own agri holdings is to ensure that death on battlefields across the stars feeds estates back home. The aristocracy understand that the Imperium will never run out of war, and so they will never run out of wealth. Rebellions flare in the underhives, and nobles see not danger but contracts to supply security forces. Xenos invade a sector, and nobles see not tragedy but opportunities for salvage and rebuilding. Even exterminatus can be profitable, for a dead world leaves behind ruins to be plundered and ashes to be sold to the ecclesiarchy as relic dust. For the poor, war is death. For the rich, war is investment. Yet even as they profit, they fear. The Imperium devours its own, and no family is ever truly safe. A rival house may conspire with the Adeptus Arbites to accuse them of corruption. An ambitious cousin may whisper to an inquisitor that hidden heresies fester in their halls. A simple failure to meet a tithe may summon retribution, swift and merciless. This fear breeds paranoia, and paranoia shapes every detail of aristocratic life. Palaces are filled not only with servants, but with spies. Guards patrol not merely for intruders, but for disloyal glances. Servitors record every whisper, every meeting, every shift in tone. Family members dine together with laughter, yet each one wonders who at the table will strike first when opportunity arises. A noble must sleep surrounded by wards and watchers, because assassination is not shameful but expected. Better to die of poison than to live long enough to be seen as weak. This paranoia trickles downward. Entire districts live under the constant threat of purges ordered not, because crime is rampant, but because fear is a useful tool. Enforcers crack skulls in the underhives because the sound of breaking bone reminds the poor that rebellion is futile. Noble families erase whole lineages in their manufactoria when whispers of discontent rise. Priests thunder sermons about loyalty, not because faith requires it, but because nobles demand it. Cruelty becomes governance, and fear becomes law. Yet indulgence does not cease. The rich hold masquerades where guests dance beneath crystal chandeliers, each mask a statement of allegiance, each step across polished marble a move in an invisible war. They sponsor plays that glorify their bloodlines, commissioning actors who starve in alleys once the curtain falls. They host hunts where alien beasts are loosed in gardens, so that lords may prove their bravery by killing creatures captured at the cost of hundreds of lives. They build zoos filled with monsters, dragged from void ships, paraded in cages until they die from despair. None of these spectacles are necessary. All of them are proof. Proof that their wealth is untouchable, that their dominance is divine, that their lives are beyond consequence. Religion is their shield. The ecclesiarchy blesses their banquets, sanctifies their palaces, declares that their thrones are symbols of the emperor's will. Priests thunder that hierarchy is holy, that the emperor himself has ordained that some are born to command and others to obey. Nobles kneel before gilded altars not out of piety but out of necessity. They must be seen to believe. They must display devotion more ostentatiously than the poor, for their very survival depends on appearing righteous. To doubt is to invite suspicion. To question is to invite annihilation. Their donations are enormous not because they care for the poor, but because funding cathedrals buys immunity from accusation. Their prayers are loud not because they believe, but because silence would be taken as guilt. In this way, religion becomes politics, faith becomes theater, and the emperor becomes nothing more than the ultimate justification for aristocratic existence. And still, beneath all this splendor, fear gnaws. Because even the richest noble knows that all their wealth cannot protect them from the Imperium itself. A single decree from Terra can strip away everything. An inquisitor's suspicion can end a dynasty. A crusade can demand soldiers until their estates are emptied. The nobility know that their lives are not secured by walls of gold, but by the fragile illusions of loyalty and faith. That is why they hold their rituals so tightly, why they drown themselves in excess, why they scheme endlessly against rivals. Because in truth, they are as much prisoners of the Imperium as the poorest worker. The difference is that their prison is gilded. Their chains are made of jewels. Their suffering is not hunger or exhaustion, but the constant terror that one day the illusions will shatter and they will fall. For the rich of the Imperium, politics is not choice. It is survival. And survival demands that they sacrifice everything, even their humanity, to maintain the illusion that their wealth is natural, eternal, and righteous. The culture of the Imperium's rich is a theater designed to perpetuate ignorance and justify power. From birth, noble children are surrounded by symbols that remind them they are different from the masses. They grow up not in homes, but in palaces. Their lullabies sung by servants who have been trained to suppress emotion. Their toys carved from rare materials that cost lives to extract. Their lessons curated to exclude anything that might suggest equality with those beneath them. A noble child does not learn hunger, does not learn fear of cold, does not learn the weight of labor. Instead, they learn posture, tone, history as propaganda, economics as control, and etiquette as weapon. Their education is designed not to enlighten but to insulate. They study art that glorifies their ancestors while the names of those who bled to build those triumphs are erased. They read histories where victory is inevitable and failure is always the fault of the masses. They are taught that their existence is the pinnacle of civilization, and that without them, the galaxy would fall into anarchy. This belief is not questioned because no alternative is ever presented. Tutors speak not of starvation or rebellion, but of duty and destiny. Priests recite not the lives of the poor, but the victories of saints who were themselves nobles. Every story, every image, every lesson is another brick in the wall that separates noble perception from human reality. Their art is excess disguised as refinement. Painters labor for years to capture the serene features of a noble's face. Sculptors cut monuments that rise higher than temples. Musicians compose symphonies that echo through halls lined with gold. None of these works exist for beauty alone. They are propaganda, constant reminders that the nobility are destined to be immortal in stone, eternal in song, untouchable in paint. The suffering of the artist is irrelevant. If a singer dies perfecting a single note, their death becomes another layer of legend. If a sculptor's lungs collapse from stone dust, their sacrifice is framed as devotion. The nobility consume art like they consume food, not as sustenance, but as affirmation that they are more than human. Their culture is a ritual of superiority. Banquets are not meals, but declarations that their appetites outweigh the lives of thousands. Balls are not dances, but performances of power, where alliances are formed and enemies humiliated beneath chandeliers that could fund hospitals. Masquerades are not entertainments, but symbolic wars, where every mask is chosen to intimidate, seduce, or threaten. Everything is a display. Everything is staged. Everything is proof that they are untouchable. The rich cultivate ignorance deliberately. They do not want their children to know that manufactoria burn through millions of workers a year. They do not want them to hear that rebellion is crushed not by heretics, but by starving families. They do not want them to realize that their jewels are mined by slaves and their gowns woven by children. To preserve their own comfort, they ensure that ignorance is inherited like blood. They control what is seen, what is spoken, what is remembered. Even when cracks appear, they are sealed quickly with ritual. If a noble glimpses the misery below their tower, they are told it is necessary, that it is holy, that it is the price of order. If they ask questions, they are silenced with sermons. If they persist, they are removed quietly, sent to monasteries or declared heretics. The machine of aristocracy cannot tolerate doubt, because doubt spreads like fire, and fire destroys illusions. So doubt is extinguished before it can spark. Their decadence reaches beyond luxury into obsession. They collect not only jewels and relics, but entire worlds of culture. Some nobles own galleries that span kilometers, filled with artifacts stolen from dead civilizations. Others sponsor genetic artisans who craft living sculptures, human bodies reshaped into grotesque art forms that suffer eternally for noble amusement. In void palaces, nobles keep choirs of vat-grown singers whose voices never break, their existence nothing but sound. In hunting reserves, nobles release beasts imported from alien planets, then slaughter them not for survival but for spectacle. These acts are not seen as cruelty, but as refinement, proof that their tastes transcend mortal needs. In truth, they are sickness, indulgence, spiraling until it becomes indistinguishable from madness. Education continues this cycle of corruption. Noble children are taught strategy as if they were generals, economics as if they were kings, rhetoric as if they were saints. But they are never taught compassion. They are never exposed to the realities of those they rule. They learn to speak in abstractions, to describe starvation as inefficiency, death as attrition, rebellion as malfunction. Their minds are sharpened to dissect numbers while their hearts are dulled to human cost. By the time they inherit power, they are incapable of seeing people as people. They see only assets, liabilities, resources, threats. And this blindness is the very reason the Imperium endures. Because a noble who could see the truth would collapse under its weight. Culture among the rich is filled with rituals that reinforce hierarchy. When they dine, servants kneel in silence, heads bowed, never permitted to meet the eyes of those they serve. When they walk through their estates, guards march in formation to remind all who watch that violence is always near. When they pray, priests stand ready to interpret their words as holy, regardless of sincerity. Every act, every motion, every word is meant to sustain the illusion that nobles are divine while the masses are expendable. Over generations, this culture becomes self-perpetuating. The children of nobles do not question because their parents never did. They pass down jewels and estates, along with blindness and cruelty. They inherit palaces built on bones and never consider that the foundations are rotten. The cycle repeats endlessly because it has been designed to repeat. The Imperium thrives on repetition. Its wars never end, its sermons never change, its structures never evolve. And so too do its nobles remain frozen in rituals older than memory, performing the same acts of indulgence and ignorance century after century. Yet beneath the surface cracks form. Every once in a while, a noble sees too much, learns too much, asks too much. Sometimes they are silenced, sometimes they vanish, sometimes they descend into madness. And sometimes they attempt to act, to change, to rebel against their own privilege. These rare moments never end well. The Imperium does not forgive dissent, not even from its wealthiest. A noble who turns against the system is branded a traitor, a heretic, an apostate. Their estates are seized, their families destroyed, their names erased. The message is clear. Culture exists to maintain ignorance, not to challenge it. Education exists to perpetuate obedience, not to liberate. Art exists to glorify power, not to reveal truth. Nobility exists not because it is needed, but because without it, the structure of exploitation would collapse. The emperor's servants call this stability. In reality, it is decay, preserved by ritual. For the rich of the Imperium, life is theater. Culture is propaganda, and ignorance is a crown they pass from generation to generation, polished until it gleams so brightly it blinds even those who wear it. The first cracks do not sound like gunfire. They sound like missing shipments and quiet apologies. A tithe is late because the mag rail that feeds the upper vaults has stalled again. A grain reserve grows mold because the filters have not been replaced. A manufactorum quota dips because the shift died 3 hours early from bad air. The rich do not hear the cracks because their halls are padded with silk and their windows are soundproof. They feel it as a nuisance recorded in a ledger, a variable to be corrected by orders issued through intermediaries they will never meet. A governor signs a decree to increase rations for enforcers. A highborn matriarch authorizes a debt age for workers who fall behind. A priest is given funds to preach harder about obedience. The first fires start where the ducks breathe out into the sump, where hab blocks are stacked until gravity itself complains. Someone sets a pile of tallow wafers alight beneath a stack of tithe crates to keep children warm, and the spark races up oily walls until half a block is a single red lung. Enforcers arrive in black armor and announce a curfew through vox speakers that crackle with static and contempt. When the crowd does not disperse fast enough, shock malls speak the language that the nobles prefer, the language of quiet. The next day, production resumes because it has to, and paperwork resumes because it must, and sermons resume because they always do. The rich tell themselves that order has returned, that the little people have been reminded of their place, that the machine will continue to turn if the proper gears are tightened. It is not order. It is pressure added to a system that never cools. Whispers ride the vents. A crew chief who lost a son to a lift collapse refuses a shift, and 30 follow. A scribe leaks the truth that the noble granaries are full while ration cards shrink, and suddenly the prayers in the work chapel taste like ash. A woman from the reclamation pit stands on a crate and speaks in a voice that carries farther than it should. She does not call for heresy. She calls for bread. That is enough. The Arbites arrive with shotguns held across iron chests and read a proclamation that calls hunger sedition. The crowd watches as a boy is dragged forward to be made into a lesson. The gavel falls, the sentence is carried out in the street, and everyone learns that the emperor loves obedience more than breath. The rich watch the report on a crystal hololith while sipping wine that glows faintly from stasis fields, and they nod at the phrase, necessary measure. They authorize more. The machine groans. Sabotage begins as mistakes. A conveyor jams because someone forgot to clear a guard plate. A pump cavitates because the valve wheel has been replaced with a circle of wood. A freight lift seizes because grit has found a way into a bearing that used to be sealed. Hours bleed into days, penalties stack into years, debt into generations. The nobles who own the lines do not ask why. They ask who. Bounties are posted and rivals denounce one another in whispers for profit dressed as piety. Beneath the drains in the heat where no noble eye has ever lingered, something older than politics wakes. Apostate preachers crawl from cellar shrines and tell starving men that the emperor has turned his face from them. Heretics promise that machine spirits will be kinder if the old rites are thrown away. A thing with too many fingers learns to speak the names of fear in the sump and finds listeners. The nobles do not see cults. They see inefficiency. They see theft. They see the insult of disobedience. They answer with contracts. A private cohort is hired from off-world, men with scarred faces and quiet boots, weapons that look like obedience given form. The cohort moves through the lower levels with a precision learned on 100 punitive expeditions. Doors are kicked in, ledgers are seized, people vanish. The governor receives a report that lists numbers as if they were weights of grain. He does not ask for names. A week of this breaks nothing. The cohort discovers that the sump is a maze and the habs are a hive, and fear can be mapped but not contained. The crowd learns to move, to vanish, to strike lines and retreat into walls, to make the city itself into an accomplice. A maglev tunnel collapses at shift change, and the casualty count is written as an inconvenience to logistics, while 1,000 families in the lightless blocks begin to speak to one another for the first time. The nobles order sermons. The ecclesiarchy obliges. Priests stride into squares with censers that cough blessed smoke and promise that obedience will be rewarded, that patience is virtue, that hunger is a test set by the master of mankind. The crowd kneels because kneeling is survival, then rises when the priests leave because rising is the only answer to a stomach that eats itself. A girl with a shaved head climbs a ruined statue and declares that the granaries will be opened, and for a moment the sound that rises from the square is not anger but hope, The Arbites return with riot shields, and the hope runs into Ceramite. The first shot is a sound that the rich cannot imagine. They know the sound of ceremonial volleys and hunting guns fired over manicured gardens. They do not know the flat slap of a riot shotgun in a tunnel that turns echoes into knives. The square becomes a bowl that slops with blood and panic. People stampede and crush one another against walls that have never cared for humanity. And when it is over, the only things left upright are the statues and the speakers that whisper curfew. The next day, the first noble hears the riot with bare ears. It happens because a lift shaft that should have been guarded is not. The spire withdraws into itself like a mollusk and seals gates that have not closed in a century. The noble is a daughter who has been taught to never look down, but the lift fails between levels and the emergency shutters do not seal, and smoke of a kind that has never been allowed to exist in her lungs slides in. Through a seam, she sees what the windows of her life were designed to hide. A human sea, faces turned upward, a wave of bodies moving through a plaza where polished stone has become slippery, and the servants who always stood between viewing and consequence are gone because they are down there in the wave. She watches enforcers form a line and break, watches a banner that once hung in her dining hall burn on a spear carried by a man who was paid to polish the floors that it dragged across, watches a group of women carry a makeshift stretcher with a child who is far too still. The lift jerks and the seam closes, and she is returned to a corridor where the air is clean and the carpet is thick, and the servants pretend not to see her shaking hands. That night, the spire hosts a vigil. The chapel is bright with gold and the air is sweet with incense, and the priest speaks of tests and trials and the need for generous hearts. A sororitas canoness arrives with armor that reflects firelight like a promise and vows that the guilty will be purged and the innocent protected. The nobles kneel and weep, and their tears are sincere, because fear has taught them to feel again. The next morning, the sororitas descend into the smoke, and prayers become flames. The purgation is not delicate. Flamer Prometheum washes corridors until icons curl and paint blackens like meat. Shot and bolt crack in the confined spaces until ears ring for hours. Some of those who burn are truly corrupted, their mouths open to scream names that should never be spoken, but many are not. Hunger is not heresy, but it does not matter when the order is purge, when the logic is simple, when the mandate is to cauterize a wound until no infection remains. The rich receive a secure vox describing the operation in terms that sound clean. They do not receive the smell. An inquisitor arrives quietly, a figure in a plain cloak who passes through 10 checkpoints with a nod. He sits in a governor's chamber that has never known silence and makes it silent. He asks questions that do not sound like questions, and the governor answers before he has finished speaking. The inquisitor reads tithe schedules and casualty rosters with the same eye, and when he looks up, the line of the governor's mouth sags. Martial law is declared with a stamp that presses ink into paper the way explosives press fire into air. A cousin who has been waiting for this moment arranges a dinner to celebrate unity. A toast is drunk, a breath is taken, a throat tightens. A dynasty changes hands as the poison completes a plan that started with a smile. The inquisitor does not care who holds the seal, as long as the tithe is met and the chant of loyalty is loud. The new lord orders the granaries opened for a day to buy a week of calm, then orders the gate sealed again because generosity that is not strategic is weakness, and weakness is fatal. The poor take the food and swallow the insult with it. Nothing has been solved, only delayed. The guard arrives in green columns, boots, banging out a metronome of inevitability. The nobles watch them deploy from high galleries and use words like reassurance as if such words could armor flesh. The guard is not the spire's toy. It belongs to the Imperium, and it does not parley. Lines are drawn across districts that used to be maps of family loyalties and converted into maps of fire. A commissar executes a squad leader for retreating 6 steps without an order, and the line holds because terror and duty are twins. The rich approve the action on a slate with a signature that has approved so many things that the hand no longer shakes. In the sump, a man who once swept soot from turbine halls is taught to load a stolen magazine into a rifle that was intended for export. He does not know the proper litany for the machine's spirit. He only knows where to aim. A hab corridor becomes a trench. A prayer niche becomes a sniper's nest. A shrine becomes a triage, where prayers are recited over stumps. For 72 hours, the city eats itself. And when the chewing stops, there are gaps where blocks used to be and silences where families used to laugh. in the rare moments that laughter was permitted. The nobles throw a procession. They must. The optics demand it. The priest blesses the spire from a balcony. The canoness receives a reliquary. The inquisitor is not on the balcony because he is reading new reports in a room that smells like fear. The rich applaud the concept of stability and return to tables burdened with foods that taste faintly of smoke because the wind has finally found a way into their vents. They call the crisis concluded. The administratum does not. It extends the tithe schedule and raises the expected output to recover losses. The line supervisors bleed their crews for the new quotas. The debt clerks sharpen their pens. The Arbites requisition more ammunition, and the precious metals to stamp more badges that make murder into order. In the spire, the daughter who saw the seam cannot sleep. She walks corridors at hours when only servitors should move, and at the end of one passage finds an old portrait of a founder of the house. The founder's eyes are painted to follow the viewer, and for the first time, she wonders who else those eyes have seen burn. She suggests that the house fund a hospitaller wing in the lower levels. Her mother smiles and agrees to a study, and the study multiplies into committees, and the committees delay until the seam in the daughter's mind begins to close under the weight of duty lessons. The crack remains. It always remains, in each generation, a thin line of light beneath a door that is always pulled shut. The rich answer cracks by building distance. New access ways are sealed and labeled obsolete. The old promenades that offered views of the lower city are replaced with galleries that display views painted by artists who have never breathed sump air. A new orbital manor is commissioned so that when the next riot comes, the family can watch it from a safe altitude while discussing the ethics of intervention. Security contracts are renegotiated to include provisions for airborne egress that prioritize bloodline markers. Algorithms are tuned to sort servants by disposable value when evacuation trams are overloaded. A devout lord funds a choir to sing every night for a year for the souls of those lost in the purge and sleep soundly to the sound of absolution. In the forges, the heretic who whispered to tired men is dead, but the litany he twisted has found its way into the rhythm of hammers. In the sump, the apostate preacher is ash, but the memory that hunger is not a sin remains. In the shrine, the statue that was cracked by a shockwave receives more candles than ever because grief needs somewhere to stand. The nobles do not see any of this. They see a ledger returning to black. They see a ceremony performed without incident. They see mirrors that show them only their own reflections surrounded by light. They reward themselves. Metals are hammered, scrolls are inked. A banquet is held where speeches compare the house to a bulwark and the bulwark to the Imperium and the Imperium to eternity. The daughter speaks once, briefly, and says that eternity is a long time to be afraid. No one laughs. The line of servants does not move. The moment passes. Far above the planet, a patrol craft reports a brief flutter in the void, a storm brewing in a reef of cold light that navigators do not like to see. The message is logged and queued, because the administratum has rules about precedence. On the surface, a harvest festival begins. Banners are unfurled. Nobles ride past ranks of workers whose faces have been taught to be still. The seam in the daughter's mind opens again when she hears a child cough, a cough that should not exist in clean air. And she looks up through the crystal of the promenade to the thin line of the void and understands, without having words for it, that distance is a wall that keeps a house safe until the wall learns to walk. She turns to say something significant and finds that words are slow and rituals are fast, and decisions have already been made in rooms she will never enter. The rich of the Imperium live by distance and denial, and when both fail, they live by sacrifice, never their own. The crack that opened in one city is already closing under banners and incense and schedules, but it is not the last. The machine never cools. Pressure never fades. The seams multiply like hairline fractures in glass that still looks whole to the eye, until one day the light finds them all at once. The rich do not sail like common travelers. They cross the void in palaces that wear engines like jewelry. A noble void yacht drifts from the shadow of a ringed world, and every plate of its hull is etched with the lineage of a house that believes itself older than history. Cherub servitors hum through vaulted galleries, their wings beating recycled air into perfumed currents, while auspex lanterns purr lullabies to machine spirits that have been coddled since christening. The dining hall is a cathedral with a keel, its long windows of crystal showing stars that seem close enough to pluck. Its floors laid with woods harvested from a dead world that was cut down to make a single noble smile. The passengers glide from chamber to chamber, as if gravity itself serves their blood. They discuss contracts measured in continents and wars measured in harvests. They never use the word crew. They say staff and assets and resources, and the ship translates contempt into orders, and the orders are obeyed because the air belongs to the wealthy first. In a stasis vault beneath the music, a genetic heir sleeps inside a glass womb, watched by a choir of Medicae servitors, whose faces show only the serenity of perfect obedience. The scion is a contingency against assassination, an insurance policy written in flesh. The nobles toast to the future while eyes flicker toward the vault, counting the ways that future might be arranged. On the bridge, navigators squat in velvet pits, third eyes bound in veils that smell of oil and incense. They sing a path through a sea no mortal can understand, voices merging with the hum of the Gellerfield, while the void ship's master signs litanies for every lever. Even here, the rich make theater. They step onto the bridge at appointed hours to watch the holiness of translation and to pretend that they have guided the journey with intention rather than been carried by the labor of others. When the bells of emergence toll and reality remembers itself, the nobles clap softly, as if the universe performed for them. The yacht makes for an orbital manse that hangs over a garden world like a crown. The manse contains climates curated by fashion. One quadrant is winter, so gowns may shimmer with frost. One is desert, so guests may hunt sleek reptiles bred for their color. One is a storm held constant above a terrace, so that lightning can applause a speech. The world below is green and quiet because the tithes are paid by mechanized harvesters that strip fields exactly to quota, leaving workers only the dignity of prayer. The governor greets his guests with a smile that looks generous from a balcony and hungry from any other angle. He leads them through galleries of trophies collected by ancestors who confused conquest with culture. Here is a skull inscribed with victory dates. Here a blade that drank the blood of 1,000 men. Here a tapestry woven from the hair of prisoners who did not deserve remembering. The nobles murmur appreciation as if looking at fine terrain and not at what the terrain cost. Contracts are unrolled on tables that once held maps of battles. The governor wants a new orbital ring to move grain faster to fulfill an extended tithe. The nobles want guarantees that the ring will be staffed by bonded families whose debts can be inherited. No one says the word slavery, because that word has been made illegal while the practice has not. They say obligation and service and sacred duty, and the ink dries as easily as blood. A rogue trader attends, smiling with the patience of a man who has bargained with Xenos and Storm and bureaucrat alike. His charter is an empire disguised as a document. He promises routes beyond the rim, where spices grow in vacuum greenhouses and ores glitter in mountains that never see sunlight. The nobles invest because the story flatters them. They like being patrons of boldness, as long as boldness is performed within measured risk. They do not board the trader's ship. They do not breathe the air of places where the Gellerfield shudders. They sign and sip and imagine that a signature is courage. The void is honest. It punishes vanity without warning. Mid-feast, the auspex chime changes pitch, and the bridge requests discretion. A distress squawk thrashes through Vox channels, a mining convoy, bleeding panic, as it runs from a shape that spits blue lightning across the dark. The governor glances toward the nobles and calculates how much fear is fashionable. Too little and he seems naive. Too much and he seems weak. He chooses measured concern. He orders the guns of his defense station to a ready posture, while the choir in the chapel sings louder, so the sound of clamps locking into place will be mistaken for ritual. The nobles ask if their yacht should depart, and the governor assures them that loyalty and gratitude are strong here. The cannons answer with a sound that makes the windows tremble. No pirate boards an orbital guarded by hungry men, with official sanction. A wreck drifts past the viewing promenade hours later, a broken cargo spine glistening with frozen air, and the guests comment on how beautiful starlight looks when it shatters on metal. The governor orders a salvage tithe. The rogue trader praises quick thinking. The navigator prays that the next translation will be smooth. None of them think about the names of the crew whose ship has become decor. The rich treat the void as a stage. They host balls in zero gravity where dancers orbit one another like polite moons, catching handholds of silk rope and letting momentum carry them through constellations mapped onto the ceiling. They release doves engineered to survive a moment without air, so that their deaths look like art rather than suffocation. They tell stories about the time an inquisitor stayed in their guest suite and left a blessing carved into the headboard, and all of them laugh too softly at the part where the blessing looks like a warning. Every suite has a panic route that connects to armored shafts. Every table centerpiece conceals a pistol. Every servant has been background checked by a scribe who will be executed if a single lie escapes their ink. Extravagance and emergency share a wall in every noble house. It is not only pirates who test their distance from consequence. Quotas rise because a distant bureau has recalculated the weight of obedience. The governor receives the increase as a fact like gravity. He passes it down as holy decree. The fields do not stretch farther to meet it. The machines are tuned to run hotter, and the men who tend them begin to dream of water they cannot afford. The nobles tour these fields in palanquins that float on grav plates, commenting on the beauty of rows that never end. And from the corners of their eyes, they register that the workers do not look up when the palanquins pass. They misread contempt as humility, because humility is what they paid for. One evening, the rogue trader opens a crate and reveals an idol of beaten copper from a world whose civilization ended when its tithe ledger reached an error that none of the scribes dared to correct. The idol has eyes that have seen oceans evaporate under unshielded suns. The nobles pretend not to feel watched. The trader names a price that would feed a city for half a year, and the lady of the house buys it without bargaining because bargaining is for equals and she prefers worship. The idol is placed in a niche, opposite a painting of an ancestor who ordered a city sacked for hesitating to bow. The ancestor's gaze meets the idol's emptiness, and history becomes a conversation that no one living can hear. In the lower decks of the orbital manse, the crews talk more quietly. The Medicae station is short on synth skin, and the overseer denies requests for overtime rations, because a report has blamed the last riot on bread rather than batons. A young tech finds a prayer scratched into a bulkhead behind a coolant stack. It is not a prayer to the Emperor. He burns it with a pocket torch and does not report it. He tells himself he did not see what he saw. Blindness is currency here. Above the concerns of air and valves, a banquet begins that marks the sealing of the ring contract. The governor raises a cup to the Emperor and to prosperity. The rogue trader raises a cup to expansion. The house matriarch raises a cup to lineage. In the pauses between toasts, other cups rise to private hopes. A rival hopes poison works. A cousin hopes her child inherits before an inquisitor asks the wrong question. A vassal hopes his debts will be forgiven in exchange for one more betrayal. The choir sings and the navigators murmur, and the stars slide without caring. After the banquet, the matriarch walks alone through a gallery, where portraits watch with eyes that have been painted to know triumph but not cost. She stops at a window that shows the planet turning like a coin. At the rim of the world, night devours day with soft patience, and city lights glow on the dark like bioluminescent plankton. She tells herself those lights are joy. She tells herself those lights are gratitude. She does not tell herself those lights are habs, burning because the new quotas have made old machines dangerous. Her reflection in the glass is beautiful and brave. The world beneath the glass is tired and does not know her name. Wealth buys audiences with holy offices. The matriarch petitions a canoness for additional sisters to anchor morale during the ring construction. The canoness listens as if to a confession and finally replies that the order is bound to 5 wars and 7 rebuilds and 3 pilgrimages. She will send a reliquary and a squad. The rest must be solved by governance, which is a word that means bearing the blade without admitting that blood will be necessary. The officio assassinorum is never named by the rich, only implied with careful metaphors. Yet letters are drafted in inks that disappear in light. Couriers are chosen for loyalty, proven by the absence of family, and a problem with a signature sitting on the wrong desk is removed under the weight of bad luck. An accident in a lift, a sleep that forgets to end, a door that refuses to open while oxygen refuses to arrive. The governor pretends not to know. The nobles pretend not to order. The assassinorum pretends not to exist. The corpse is real all the same. Meanwhile, the ring grows in segments that glint like fish scales. Every day, a new arc is towed into place, blessed, bolted, sealed. Every day, a worker falls and becomes a shape that vanishes into cloud. His name is marked on a slate, and the slate becomes a number, and the number becomes a cost of doing business. The matriarch hosts a viewing for the ring's first closure. Choirs on the manse and in the governor's palace sing in relay, answering one another across vacuum. Vox casters carry the sound into fields, until the wheat seems to pulse to the beat of glory. The rogue trader fires a salute from his prow guns, and the station artillery returns it with a romantic burst that shivers the windows. Couples pledge children to the work. Priests anoint cranes. A servitor breaks and is replaced mid-hymn. It all looks like triumph, because triumph has uniforms and lighting. A week later, a bearing seizes in an orbital transfer hub and the ring chews its own tongue. 3 cars grind until heat paints the carriages cherry red. Cables scream like beasts, and a section jerks out of true, so that the atmosphere that kept celebration polite becomes flame that keeps silence permanent. Sirens howl up gravity wells. The manse lounges empty themselves of silk and laughter as emergency instruction holos flower from walls and announce that oxygen protocols require nobles first. The doors recognize genetic keys and open like servants. On the lower decks, the doors recognize nothing and stay closed until the lights go out. The matriarch watches the fire crawl along the curve of the ring and tells herself that the engineers will isolate the breach. The engineers are already dead. The rogue trader orders his ship to minimal cross-section and rolls to present plates that can take debris, yelling to cut salvage drones loose so they do not pull wreckage into the hull. The governor shouts for the guard to mobilize because shouting is proof of command, then whispers to his adjutant to purge the intake manifests for the bearing assemblies because signatures last longer than flames. The canoness walks into heat that paints her armor the color of courage and drags 2 children to a bulkhead door that has melted into a sculpture of refusal. She does not pray for the door to open. She prays to be the sort of woman who does not step backward. The Geller hum is steady in the yacht's bones. The navigators chant to calm themselves because psychic sight sees too much during fire. The yacht could break orbit and run. The matriarch's steward suggests it. The matriarch shakes her head because retreat would make the tale ugly when it is told later at tables where power eats reputation. She orders the yacht to dock with the manse's stricken spoke to act as a pressure plug, while voidsmen throw lines across distances that want to kill. The ship groans like a beast bearing a palace on its back. Clamps bite and hold. Seals hiss. And corridors that were prayers become bridges for fleeing people. Nobles cross first because metrics demand it. Servants carry the heir's stasis cradle because doctrine demands that family be future and future be more important than present. Some servants do not cross because the count of bodies would become inconvenient if everyone survived. The steward invents a failure in a log and orders 3 doors to remain shut on the grounds of containment. A boy pounds on one of those doors until the skin peels from his palms and then stops. The ring keeps burning. It stops at last because flame eats itself when nothing remains to consume. Smoke pours in a gray river around the planet until the sunrise makes it look like a blessing. Numbers begin to resolve. The governor counts costs. The canoness counts the living. The rogue trader counts opportunities among the debris. The matriarch counts the enemies who will try to turn this into shame. The administratum counts the shortfall, and the tithe recalculates by appearing on a new slate in a new office with a new deadline. Funerals happen in shifts. The nobles hire choristers to give grief a key and meter. The workers invent their own ritual, a silence that lasts while the clock turns and is more honest than any sermon. The idol of copper stares without blinking at both. The rich publish a declaration that speaks of resilience and community. It is signed with flourishes that have outlived cities. To prove the words, they open the granaries for 2 days. The bread tastes like smoke. Inside the yacht, the Medicae report that the heir's stasis cradle suffered a power fluctuation during the docking impact. The numbers say viability reduced by a margin too small to matter. The matriarch stares at the decimal and understands that fate has placed a thumb on the scale that measures legacy. She orders another cradle prepared and 3 new heirs selected from frozen lines. Redundancy is the only tenderness the machine allows. At night, the matriarch walks to the same window and sees the ring as a broken bracelet. Below it, the fields look like hair combed too hard. She thinks of the doors that did not open and the voices that were not recorded. She tells herself politics permits no other truth than utility. Far away, an inquisitor receives a packet of reports stamped with seals that sweat fear. He reads slowly and underlines 3 names, then files the packet under a tab that means not yet. He has wars that burn like suns and heresies that eat planets. A ring that ate its makers is a familiar hunger. He will return when the tithe fails a second time. He always returns. The nobles restore what guests can see first. The promenade gets new glass, the galleries new paint, the gardens new imported beasts to replace the ones that suffocated. The crews get new instructions printed in smaller fonts, so that signatures for hazard acceptance fit on the same slate as signatures for gratitude. The rogue trader departs with a hold full of artifacts that were not promised to him, and a smile ready for the next dinner, where the next ring will be funded by people who have learned nothing except how to speak the word resilience without choking on it. The canoness leaves behind a reliquary and 2 sisters to keep the shrine from emptiness. She wants to leave more and cannot. The governor approves a new design for bearing housings that includes cheaper alloys and thicker rhetoric. The matriarch instructs the steward to order tapestries depicting survival. The tapestries arrive smelling of dye and sweat, and a city far away forgets how to breathe to pay for them. The void remains, patient and cold. It does not care if the rich have learned a lesson. It cares only that mass moves and heat dissipates. The Imperium cares only that ledgers balance and banners do not fall. The people care that doors open when smoke comes. The rich care that doors open when their seals approach. Between these 2 needs lies a valley filled with bodies and explanations. The nobles call the valley history. The workers call it life. The idol watches and never blinks. To be rich in the Imperium is to live in a lie so complete that it becomes truth. It is to stand upon a mountain of bones and believe the wind is fresh because it carries incense. It is to drink wine pressed from 1,000 worlds and tell yourself the taste is divine rather than the bitterness of blood. It is to pray loudly enough that no one notices you are deaf to the screams beneath your feet. Nobility is not safety. It is not power. It is a gilded cage, with doors locked from both sides. The rich imagine themselves eternal, but every dynasty is a flicker. Some vanish in assassination, some in scandal, some in the silent stroke of an inquisitor's pen. Others fade slowly as their wealth is devoured by wars they cannot control, by demands they cannot deny, by time itself which rots flesh even in the most perfumed chambers. No matter how many walls are raised, no matter how many guards are bought, no matter how many prayers are sung, all nobility ends in death, and death is the one thing their wealth cannot bribe. Yet the cycle continues, because the Imperium demands it. The machine does not function without hierarchy. The tithes cannot flow without overseers. The sermons cannot land without examples of divine reward. The wars cannot be paid for without fortunes hoarded in the spires. And so, generation after generation, the rich are cultivated like crops, to be harvested for influence, for signatures, for bodies. When a lineage must be sacrificed to satisfy suspicion, they are as much a part of the machine as the workers they despise. Only their chains are plated in gold, and their shackles are called privilege. In their own eyes, they are saviors. They speak of stewardship, of heritage, of responsibility. They hold banquets to celebrate charity that never reaches further than their peers. They fund cathedrals that glitter above ruins. They kneel before altars with hands uncalloused by labor and believe their prayers weigh more than the lives of billions. They mistake insulation for virtue, blindness for wisdom, cruelty for strength. They believe their children are born better because no one ever told them otherwise, and those who might have told them were silenced before their words reached the spire. The tragedy is not that they live like gods. The tragedy is that they believe it, because belief sustains the lie, and the lie sustains the Imperium. Every jewel on a noble's brow is a ration stolen. Every banquet, a famine somewhere else. Every laugh at a masquerade, a sob in a hablock. Wealth is not wealth in the Imperium. It is hunger inverted. It is suffering made into ornament. It is blood frozen into crystal goblets and bones carved into chair legs. The rich call it culture, tradition, destiny. In truth, it is theft, sanctified by time. And yet the Imperium cannot let it go. The moment the nobles are stripped bare, the machine falters, because the machine is built on their vanity. The administratum needs their signatures. The ecclesiarchy needs their donations. The guard needs their regiments. The mechanicus needs their contracts. The Inquisition needs their obedience. Even the emperor entombed in his throne is said to need their prayers. And so the lie is never broken. It is reinforced daily in ritual, in feast, in sermon, in war. What is life like for the rich in the Imperium? It is splendid. It is terrible. It is safety. That is fear in disguise. It is ignorance, carved into palaces. It is indulgence, painted in suffering. It is a dream that requires billions to starve so one may sleep without hunger. It is power that feels fragile every moment. It is faith performed as theater. It is wealth so vast it becomes meaningless, and fear so constant it becomes instinct. For the poor, the Imperium is hell. For the rich, it is a gilded version of the same hell. Different walls, different food, different clothes, but the same truth that no one escapes the weight of the Imperium, not even those who believe themselves its masters. In the end, the palaces crumble just like the hab blocks. The portraits fade just like the ration slates. The bloodlines die just like the line workers. Death erases the distinctions the Imperium spends eternity enforcing. The only difference is how long it takes and how many suffer to keep the lie alive. Until then, what is life like for the rich? In Warhammer 40k, it is everything the masses dream of and everything they could never endure. It is glory and rot, feasts and poison, prayer and fear. It is the best humanity can imagine and the worst humanity can inflict. It is proof that in the 41st millennium there is no escape from cruelty, only different versions of it packaged for different classes. For the nobles, the cruelty is wrapped in gold leaf and lit by chandeliers. For everyone else, it is darkness and silence, but it is cruelty all the same. In the grim darkness of the far future, wealth is not salvation. It is just another mask that death will one day strip away. The spires fall. The titles are forgotten. The palaces are dust. All that remains is the echo of suffering, and the Imperium feeds on echoes forever.